Welcome to the Moonlit Music channel. My name's Liam Alexander, and I'm here to teach you guys how to mix harsh vocals. We're going to go over the science behind why vocals are perceived as harsh, and then we're going to touch on the right and the wrong way to solve the problem in the mix. So what causes harsh vocals? Well, you'll notice they rear their ugly head when people are belting, singing powerfully, and really trying to project. And it's because it's truthfully a distortion of the vocal cords that resonates in the vocal cavity before exiting into the microphone. And resonating is something that's applicable to more than just vocals. If you've ever been in a bathroom or a small room and you hear certain frequencies build up and ring out, that's a resonance. Resonance is just when sound is bouncing between two hard surfaces in a way where the reflections synchronize the peaks and the valleys of that sound wave, causing that sound wave to get louder in comparison to everything else. But there's a deeper, more instinctual science as to why these sounds are abrasive. Another word for harsh vocals could be whistle tones, and these tones appear generally between 2K and I'd say about 6K. Not only are our ears most sensitive to this area of the frequency spectrum, it elicits an instinctual response that triggers a feeling of danger. And the reason is because it's the area of the frequency spectrum that we hear the most when there's a baby crying, when there's a child screaming, where there's something problematic happening in our surroundings and we instinctually need to address it. And if we can't, it stresses us out. It gives you a feeling when you're listening to that song or singer that they're yelling at you, when really they're just singing powerfully. I think it's important to understand the science and the instinctual reasons why these phenomenons exist, because it helps you apply these principles to multiple different situations instead of just copying and pasting a solution you saw on my YouTube video or another one's. You have to learn to think for yourself if you want to be a great engineer. So now that you understand why these harsh vocals exist and what causes them, let's jump into Pro Tools and let's start digging into the wrong and the right way to solve these problems in your next vocal mix. So here we are inside of Pro Tools. We're going to start digging into how we can solve this vocal harshness problem. So I've got a mix that I did for a song that I released in collaboration with an artist named Chloe K. Absolutely phenomenal singer. But like most women, when she projects, you get a little bit of that harshness in there. So here's this ending part. I'll play it for you so you can hear. You'll be able to hear what we're going to be digging out, and then we'll dive into the wrong way to fix this problem, and then we'll use the wrong way to show you how to do the right way. So here's the ending.
So let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind a little bit. Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind. How?
This is an unmastered track, straight mix, just so you can really hear the dynamics, hear the detail, and get a good feel for how these things work, right? So if we solo out this vocal, you're going to hear that sort of distortion really show itself. And there is some tube distortion because it is recorded on a tube amp, so that's definitely a factor in here, but it's distorting based on these whistle tones. This is an example where we can really dig into it, because you have not only the source, but you have some consequences of that as well.
So let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind a little bit. Let that sink in.
So you can hear when the sync happens, you can really hear those whistle tones come out. So here's the wrong way to solve this problem. Let's bring in an EQ, let's target that band, and let's just bring it down. We said somewhere between 2 and 6K. So let's do a nice Q of like 3. Let's turn the gain up to 9, because we want to hurt our ears really bad. Actually, let's do Q of 4. And let's sweep and find this problem area. So this is going to be the point where your ears hurt the most. Like this, it's easy to get fooled by other resonances that aren't problematic. And these are very small windows where these things happen. Like these, they're very tight bands. And I'm purposely not using a spectrograph for this. I like to do this with my ears because visual feedback fools you.
Sinking, I'm just losing my mind a little bit. Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind. Sinking, sinking. I'm just losing my mind a little.
I'd say 3430 is right on the money. So what most people think you want to do for this is just cut that out, right?
Sinking, I'm just losing my mind a little bit.
The problem with this method is that a listener is extremely sensitive to drastic changes in the frequency spectrum of any voice. The human brain is very familiar with what voices sound like, and when you start mangling things and cutting the shit out of everything starts to sound weird. And it may not seem that way to you when you're mixing it and when you're working on it, or even when you're listening to this tutorial. But when untrained ears start listening to your song, listening to the vocal, you can just tell that there's something weird about it. And you won't be able to put your finger on it. They won't really know what the problem is, but it's going to sort of cast a shadow over the whole song. So we have to find a way to be able to equalize or to be able to control this frequency spectrum without just simply cutting it out. You're only really looking to tamp down on this frequency range when it becomes a problem. And that's when we're going to need to reach for a dynamic equalizer. First, I'll show you how to do this with a multi-band compressor, and then I'll show you how to do this with my preferred plugin, many of which exist that are different iterations of it. So we know 3430 is the sort of general target. So let's bring in a multi-band compressor. First thing I don't like about multi-band compressors, they take a ton of processing power. You can tell my delay compensation can't even keep up with this. So it's going to be, it's a resource hog, I guess is a good way to put it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to target that area. So since it's 3500, let's just go 3K. And let's go 4500. So we're isolating that area of that frequency spectrum. And then we can solo it out too. Sorry, I'm not used to using this plugin. Not so nice, right? So let's tighten up the attack, maybe do around 12, and let's do release. Let's do it even faster. Let's do 50 milliseconds. The higher up the frequency spectrum you are, the more aggressive you can kind of be with attack time. Actually, we could go balls to the wall and just go 1 millisecond. And ratio doesn't really matter too much. Just go 4 to 1, since that's kind of like a standard target of many people. And then we're just going to bring this threshold down until we start to see that band react when those frequencies get too loud. You got to get pretty low on the dB values to start hearing interaction. So we're getting between 3 to 6 dB of gain reduction on this band. So let's bring everything back together and let's listen back to it. And you'll hear that you're not losing the presence of those frequencies in your mix. You're only just tamping down on them when they become a problem. It's called this is dynamically equalizing. You're cutting a band solely based on its loudness exceeding a certain point. It's an isolated compression.
Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind.
Such a huge difference. Let's bypass it.
Let that sink in.
You can hear that sharpness come back, and then
Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind.
it's so important that it's not gone. It's just contained. Because those frequencies are resonating. That frequency spectrum is spiking up higher than everything else, and it's removing the smoothness, the sort of relativity. It's becoming unreasonable, and we're reasoning with it. We're reasoning with the frequency. We're saying, hey, calm down, all right? Don't, once you get here, just stop, all right? That's what we're doing. Very, very similar concept to a deesser, but in a different frequency spectrum. Some deessers that can target frequencies like this are a totally appropriate plugin to use to solve this problem. So now that you've seen how to do this with a multi-band compressor, let me show you the processor that I prefer to use for this. And this is not a plug at all. It's just one of the most versatile plugins I've used. I use dynamic equalization for a lot of different things. And this plugin to me is the best version I've seen of it so far, where it's not a resource hog like a multi-band compressor. Like this is primed up to do so much shit I don't need to do. I'm only trying to isolate this one frequency. And honestly, pro tip, 99.9% of the time when you're using a multi-band compressor, you really only need it for one frequency band. Just because they're there doesn't mean that you need to use them in some way. This plugin has a terrible name, BX Dyne EQ V2. It's so great. Consider it a multi-band compressor with one band that you get to choose, right? So how this plugin is structured is you have this key input, which is the frequency material that is governing how the compressor is responding. And then you have the dynamic EQ, which is where that compression is actually happening. So in the case of this, we want to be compressing the same signal that we're basing our compression off of, but you could just as easily use a bass frequency to compress an upper frequency. Like you can separate them or you can keep them together. And I think that's a useful functionality that I've tapped into more than once, but we're not doing that right now. So let's go to our 3440, was it? 3430? Close enough, doesn't matter. We'll put our Q, this is Q, to 3, and then we can solo out that band too and listen to it.
I'm just losing my mind.
We can use those same attack release characteristics and dial in that same threshold. So I remember from the multi-band compressors like -42, and then we need to switch this to cut. And I like that instead of a ratio, you have the max gain, the most amount that you want to attenuate the signal. And I think 6 dB, anything going harder than 6 dB, it's going to be too surgical. It's going to be too obvious. It's not going to have enough musicality to make it pleasant to our ears. And factor is basically your ratio. The higher you turn this up, the more aggressive it's going to dynamically EQ this band.
Let that sink in.
So we're getting the same general compression profile we were getting out of our multi-band compressor, but for, I don't know, 1/100th of the resources.
Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind.
And that's it. Job's done. You could do this before your main compression. You could do this after your main compression. On this mix, I did it after, but typically I try to deal with these problems on the front end because I want the compressor to be responding to a version of that audio that most closely resembles that final product from a frequency balance standpoint. I do all my de-essing before my compressor. I try to do all of these things before my main compressor, and then compress that signal based on what's great about it, not based on, you know, it with all of its problems and all of its blemishes, and then try to repair everything on the back end. It's a philosophy I picked up being taught by Chris Lord-Alge. I consider it kind of an advanced technique. Like it can take some time to get it right, but if you're struggling with it, put your compressor on, dial it in, and then manipulate your EQ and your de-essing and all your treatments into that compressor, and then revisit that compressor dialing one more time. And it's an effective way to get a solid ear for these problems. So now let's listen to it again in context with our harshness dealt with.
Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind.
So I think in this case, I can turn this factor down a little bit. It's a little aggressive to the point where you can hear the vocal getting lost. And after you do something like this, don't be surprised if you can actually drive the vocal a little bit louder over the track, which I think I can definitely do here. So let's do that as well.
Let that sink in. I'm just losing my mind. How?
Now, you want a quick fix? I don't have Soothe, but my understanding of Soothe is it's a quicker version of this process. I generally like to have a little bit more control. It does a lot of, you know, things on its own, and in some cases it might be good, in some cases it might not. But feel free to check out that plugin as well, if you already have it it's doing this for you. And there you have it. You now have a toolkit that can not only solve harsh vocals from any singer, but an understanding of dynamic equalization and how you can leverage it to your benefit across many different mediums. You can clamp down on a frequency with a dynamic equalizer, but you can also enhance frequencies with dynamic equalizers. It's a great way to recover transients or get more punch out of, let's say, an 808. You're just applying the same principles on the low end, but with an upward expander instead of a downward compressor. If you found this helpful, don't just subscribe. Drop me a line in the comments. Let me know it was valuable to you and what you're struggling with, and I'll do everything I can to produce a video that helps you with your specific problem. I'm here for you guys. Now go be great.